Florida State looked anemic. They looked sick. They did not look well. And it's only game one. The season is not over. But the portal additions did not pan out the way the staff wanted them to. And you know that it's bad or that there are issues going on when DJ Uiagalelei, who is a above average good quarterback nationally, at a power 4 level, he's probably average, above average, maybe good, but he's not great, he's not near elite, he's certainly not elite. Although he shows flashes of those characteristics, he's not consistent, and consistency is key, my friends. And what Georgia Tech and Brent Key were, no pun intended, they were consistent. Florida State was anything but consistent. As the Cover 3 podcast said, it didn't look like they were that comfortable in their identity. Not one bit. And whether it was them trying to run the ball, trying to create speed and space for their receivers out of the backfield or their running backs on quick passes, easy throws to ease DJ Uiagalelei into the offense, or obviously defensively, it didn't work. It didn't work one bit. Tech stunned Florida State. They mowed them. They physically pounded them. And while I think that Florida State, in watching this game and seeing the talent they have and the coaches they have, is probably the better team in a power ranking standpoint, Florida State probably faces up against the average, above average, or even good Power 4 team, maybe better than Georgia Tech does, and maybe I'm wrong there. Georgia Tech had such a matchup advantage and also such a physical toughness and good preparation to them. And that's a credit to Buster Faulkner, Tyler Santucci, and Brent Key, who I would all rate as good in their respective areas. I think Buster Faulkner is a good offensive coordinator. Santucci is a great defensive coordinator. And I think Key's a good head coach. They have a great staff, consequentially. When you have good assistants and good coordinators and a good head coach collectively, you have a great staff, because it's hard to have good at every position on the staff and also every position on the field. Georgia Tech's defense showed up. Their safeties were doing well on blitzes and in coverage. Their defensive ends and their defensive tackles and linebackers were challenging a Florida State offensive line where, make no mistake, they struggled. But they have NFL talent on that offensive line. And that offensive line, I think, is a good offensive line. I don't think it's as elite as I expected it to be in this game. But that first drive, Florida State punished Georgia Tech. But I think Georgia Tech adjusted, and they adjusted quickly, rapidly. I don't think Florida State did that until the end of the game, when you saw DJ Uiagalelei complete some good downfield throws on the fourth downs, and you saw those plays schemed up well. But remember, before those fourth downs, Florida State was running on 3rd and long and 3rd and medium, and they couldn't run the ball. Florida State only ran for 98 yards on 3.2 yards per carry. They had a 10-yard Roydell Williams run, a 10-yard Jalen Lucas run, a 28-yard Lawrence Toffili run. All of those were on the first drive, which ended in 8 points, a touchdown, and then a 2-point conversion. You take away those 48 yards away, which were gained on 3 plays. That right there is 50 yards. 50 yards on 28 rushing attempts. Now, what's 50 divided by 28, may you ask? Florida State, outside of those 3 carries, ran for 1.8 yards per carry. Now imagine what Florida State's rushing offense would have done against, I don't know, Georgia, Alabama, even Texas with what they've lost on the defensive line, even Michigan and Penn State with what they've lost on the defensive line, Iowa, Ohio State. Think about Miami with their portal additions and what they return in Ruben Bain, or Clemson with the talent they have there. It was, for running the ball being, in my mind in the preseason, Florida State's obvious strength with what the O-line returned and with what they had at tight end, that was embarrassing. I mean, Florida State still averaged with DJ 7.1 yards per pass attempt, which ain't good, but it isn't bad either. And I thought DJ Uyunglele was not even the fourth or fifth critical problem for Florida State and Ireland. And that's concerning given the fact that he's a limited quarterback. He is. Florida State, they were favored by 10.5 points. Georgia Tech beat them 24-21. They covered the 10.5 point spread. And Tech ran for 190 yards for 5.3 yards per carry and 3 touchdowns. And that doesn't even tell the full story because of the 2 fumbles, one by Haynes King, which was totally his fault, and another in which, I don't know if it was wholly his fault, but it was partially on him too. He nearly fumbled the ball away, and that would have taken it to overtime. Another fumble could have cost Georgia Tech the game straight up. I mean, Georgia Tech did not play a perfect game. It was a great game, but far from perfect. The biggest takeaway here is that Florida State's offense is disheveled. It's disorganized. It is not coached to the highest level that it can be. More importantly, because coaching is in developing individual talent and work ethic and speed and athleticism and toughness. That is different because that's more assistant coaching, like wide receivers coach, O-line coach, strength and conditioning. That's different from Mike Norvell and play calling. Also keep in mind the fact that Alex Atkins wasn't there. Now, that may not cause much of an impact, but it also could have explained the offensive line not playing as well as it did. Atkins being the offensive coordinator, but with Norvell calling the plays, he's more so the offensive line coach with a promotional tag, from my basic understanding. If I'm wrong, correct me in the live chat or the comments below. And speaking of the live chat, we'll be answering super chats at the end of the stream, as customary. But him being there may have impacted the O-line, by the way. So until he returns, which is after the Memphis game, it's in game 4, I would hold off a little bit on the offensive line, unless they very much struggle against Boston College and Memphis. But even then, not having your O-line coach or not having a position coach for any part of your roster can be a big deal. But more importantly than that was the fact that Florida State, they're running on 3rd and long when they can't run to save their lives. They're trying the same concept, pass out of the backfield, as if Georgia Tech hasn't tackled well all day long. They're trying downfield shots with DJ Uyunglele when they have unproven wide receivers, when Tech is sending blitzes and pressure, and I don't think it was a well-schemed game for Florida State. Their preparation coming into the game may have been good, and it worked to perfection that first drive, but that was it. And we're just talking about the offense. We'll get into the defense in a few minutes. Florida State had 20 first downs. They were 5 of 12 on 3rd down. They were 2 of 3 on 4th down. That first 4th down, the only one that was missed in the game, I honestly thought that Florida State right there should have just kicked the field goal. And I'll tell you why. Because they were up by a point, 8-7. With that 2-point conversion gave them some juice. Georgia Tech decided not to try and play the 2-point conversion game and just wait until later. A field goal there, not only in hindsight, obviously makes it so that Georgia Tech is playing to get a game-tying field goal at the end, it also puts you up by 4 points. So Georgia Tech, they can't tie the game. They take the lead, and in taking the lead, they only go up by 3. So then Florida State, they kick another field goal, tie it by 14, and they can go up 17-14 in the half. And of course, in hindsight, brings the game to overtime, where I think just due to toughness and red zone efficiency, Georgia Tech wins in overtime anyway. But it's another shot, especially given that Florida State was adjusting, albeit slowly, at the end with some of those throws and being more willing to rely on DJ Uyunglele because you had to. And while he wasn't perfect, he did step up, in my opinion, in the moments where he needed to. But that's really that for Florida State's offense. They only gained around 5 yards per play, and they only scored 21 points. They didn't even cross 300 yards on a Georgia Tech defense that allowed over 200 rushing yards last season, and a Georgia Tech defense that allowed around 450 yards total. A pretty awful performance by Florida State's offense. But, and I say this with a big but, it's not like the defense was that much better either. Their defensive line in particular, linebackers, really their front all around, disappointed. And thank you, SFS Inverted, for the $5 super chat. I'll get to that at the end. Just wanted to shout you out there. The defensive line, think about it this way. Florida State brings back Patrick Payton, who's an NFL defensive end. They return a plethora of talent there, not just in Patrick Payton, but also in Joshua Farmer, Darrell Jackson Jr. They brought in Marvin Jones Jr., a five-star recruit who spent time at Georgia. And Mike Norvell praised this defensive line like he did the offensive line. The trench play was praised. I bought into the fact that Florida State could have the best trench play, perhaps, in the country. I predicted it to certainly be up there with the elites, up there with Georgia, up there with Michigan, up there with Ohio State and Alabama and Iowa and these other teams that I think will have, at minimum, above average offensive and defensive lines, and one of those being elite. That wasn't there. The elite trench play on either side of the ball, but I think especially the defensive line wasn't there. And DJ Lundy and Cam Riley at linebacker, the linebacker core was the only unit to register more than one tackle for loss. The defensive line had a half tackle for loss. The other 2.5 were to the linebackers. Florida State had no sacks. They only had one pass defended. And they did not tackle well. They had missed opportunities with tackles. I mean, think of the pass to Eric Singleton Jr., the screen pass from Haynes King. Didn't tackle that well. And it got Aiden Burr in range to kick a game-winning field goal when he missed one earlier. I mean, if you want to talk about the what-ifs for Florida State, and maybe they call the game a little differently, Georgia Tech had a field goal that didn't go their way. They had a face mask penalty on a brilliant play design by Tyler Santucci and a brilliant play up until the penalty by incoming transfer Romello Height, where they got DJ. And then face mask because of the positioning of Uiagalelei and the lack of discipline in that moment by Height, and it extended Florida State's drive. But the defense overall was just, it was pitiful to watch, and I'll tell you why it was pitiful, why it was depressing and an embarrassment. Georgia Tech went on 3 drives where they chewed 6 minutes of clock. Georgia Tech, in the final 20 minutes, this is a stat by Josh Pate, in the final 20 minutes of the game, only had one drive. Now, to their credit, it was a drive of 8 minutes and 24 seconds of 2 brilliantly designed fourth down conversions that only would have been fourth down conversions unless you change the play. Great throws by DJ Uiagalelei, great catches by his receivers, and great scheming by Mike Norvell. But Florida State's defense could not keep Georgia Tech's offense off the field, and Florida State led in TOP. They had 30 minutes and 39 seconds of possession. But Georgia Tech was able to drive on Florida State, and they were able to run the ball. There was at one point a drive, I forget exactly what it was, it may have been the second touchdown drive, where not Florida State, but Georgia Tech, they ran the ball. Haynes King constantly got outside leverage over Florida State's secondary players, linebackers, and defensive ends. He had a good game, constantly gaining outside leverage, and it wasn't enough in the end. It wasn't enough for Florida State to do whatever they had to do on defense. But Haynes King had a good game. Jamal Haynes had a good game at running back. Eric Singleton had a good game at wide receiver. Georgia Tech's wide receivers stepped up all around, like Malik Rutherford. I think a former walk-on and Chad Alexander at running back stepped up and had over 40 yards rushing for Georgia Tech. But Florida State's defense was the antithesis of that. They did not step up one bit. They had 0 sacks, 3 tackles for loss, and they allowed Georgia Tech to run for over 5 yards per carry. At one point, Georgia Tech was running for close to 7 yards per carry, and they only had 8 passing attempts. That is how badly Georgia Tech mowed Florida State's defense. But I also want to talk about Georgia Tech here and not just talk about Florida State and criticize them, and they rightfully should be criticized. But I want to talk about the winners. And on Touchdown Talk and on College Football with Sam, I like to deliver the winners last. You save the best for last. You squeeze out the pus first, and then when the person who has that horrific injury, after they're done screaming, you tell them after that what a good job they're doing. You don't tell them what a good job they're doing as their wound is just infected and you're about to painfully get all that stuff out. Speaking from personal experience because, well, maybe too much information, but I had an infected toe yesterday and it had to be cleaned out and it was very painful. But after that was the good news that my toe and consequently myself felt much better. Georgia Tech, the good news about all of this, about yesterday, is the fact that A, there is a team, America's team, an underdog in Georgia Tech, who is physical, who is tough, who has made improvements from last season, who was top 50 in the country in returning production, and they utilized it well, who is strong in their identity, that is in running the ball, who, most importantly, Haynes King looks to be improved, more secure with the football, more wise in his decision-making. He did not throw a single pass that could have been intercepted. And Georgia Tech's defense, they earned a sack. They had 7 tackles for loss. They got 63 tackles. They had 1 pass defended. And they held Florida State to, outside of those 3 plays of 10 yards or more, running for under 2 yards per carry. They held Florida State to running for under 4 yards per carry, and they held DJ Uiagalelei to completing just around 2 out of every 3 of his passes, and Florida State's receivers only averaged 10.2 yards per reception. And Florida State, keep in mind, they had no receiving touchdowns. None. No passing touchdowns, no receiving touchdowns. They had 2 rushing touchdowns, 2 of them. One was the long Lawrence Toafili run. The other was a shorter run by Roydell Williams, set up, of course, by the 2 fourth down conversions. Georgia Tech's improved everywhere. I think the strength and conditioning and the coaching and all of it through year 2 of Brent Key's official staff has worked wonders. I think the hiring of Tyler Santucci has already paid off and will pay off as the year goes along. I think that Buster Faulkner, learning from Todd Monken and blending that with his air raid background, has paid huge dividends. He worked with the quarterbacks at Georgia, so he had a hand with Stetson Bennett and the amazing growth of Bennett and the player he was and Georgia's success in the air in 21 and 22. And consequently, he also worked in that quarterback room with Carson Beck, who may be the best quarterback in the country this year. I mean, this staff for Georgia Tech is phenomenal. It's underrated. It may be one of the best in the ACC, and they are tough, physical, they are smart, wise, whatever adjectives, whatever descriptors you want to use that are positive, that have positive connotations. Georgia Tech is that. They outgained and they outscored Florida State. And not only that, they averaged more yards per play. They were the better offense and the better defense that day. The only thing Florida State had that was better was the special teams unit, with Ryan Fitzgerald kicking 2 field goals that were over 50 yards, a 59-yarder and a 52-yarder. Him and DJ carried Florida State. You cannot convince me otherwise. And maybe a little bit of Toafili and that running back room, or maybe it was the offensive line and not the running backs. I think we'll have to wait and watch a few more Florida State games to determine that. But Georgia Tech was together. Uncle Lou said this in his reaction. Georgia Tech is a team. Florida State is a collection of players, I think, who have yet to gel. There are some team aspects of Florida State, and I think Florida State is well coached, though there were some questionable decisions, but I'm not going to let that one game discount Mike Norvell and the fact that every year at Florida State they have gotten better and have improved up until this season. But Georgia Tech is a team. They're confident. They're tough. Florida State has some lessons to learn, and they could learn many things from this game against Georgia Tech. So keep on the lookout for both of these teams, for Florida State to see if they'll rebound, because with the transfers they brought in, I think it's likely they'll get better as the year goes on. And with Georgia Tech, with the experience they've returned and how confident they are in their identity, they could get better as the year goes on, especially working with a first-time defensive coordinator who's working with a team who was outside the top 100 in most defensive categories last year. They do have tough schedules compared to the average ACC school ahead, so we'll have to see. But good luck to Georgia Tech, to Florida State, and it's a huge win for Brent Key and company. Thank you for watching this cut of Touchdown Talk. Remember to like the video, subscribe to the channel, click the notification bell, comment your thoughts down below, and share this video around to other college football fans. I want to give a special shout out to my Patreon members for sponsoring this channel and video. Thanks to Crash2488 and Braska Rascal for being Heisman members. Thanks to Chris Lane, Connor Little OH, Ismar, and Tyler Nye for being All-American members. And thanks to John Lynn, Roaming Gnome, Matthew Sale, Austin Christmas, and Janisha Cockrell for being all conference members. If you want direct message access to me, and also after 6 months of membership, free signed College Football with Sam merchandise delivered to your door, merchandise of your choosing, I may add, sign up as a Heisman member for $25 a month and stick around for 6 months. All-American membership is $10. All conference membership is $5. If you want merchandise regardless, check out my merchandise store via the link in the description or down below in the pinned comment. It's high quality stuff. I wear it for all of my streams, and that's because it's comfortable, high quality, athletic, stretchy. It's really good clothing, and I encourage you to check out my merchandise store along with my Patreon page, which are in the links in the description and in the pinned comment. Have a great day, guys, and I will see you in the next one. Bye-bye.